Ava stepped out of her black SUV and looked up at the glowing sign of the restaurant. Le Vaillant, 5 stars, French cuisine, the kind of place where the wine list had its own menu, and the servers wore suits. She straightened her beige blazer, took a slow breath and walked through the polished glass doors. Tonight was supposed to be special. She had just signed the biggest deal of her career, a 7-figure contract, the kind of deal that made years of struggle feel worth it, and she wasn't here to impress anyone. She just wanted to eat well, alone. In peace, the hostess smiled politely as Ava entered. "Good evening, do you have a reservation?" Ava smiled back. "No, but I was hoping you might have room for one." The hostess checked the screen, then gestured toward a corner booth. "Of course. Right this way." The restaurant was only half full. Elegant lighting, quiet clinking of silverware, murmured conversations. Ava settled into her seat, placed her bag beside her, and took a moment. She glanced around. She was the only black woman in the room. But she was used to that. A minute later, a waiter approached. Tall, pale, late 30s, sharp jaw. Crisp uniform. His name tag read Jake. He didn't smile, didn't greet. He just stood at the end of the table with a menu in hand, but didn't place it down. Instead, he asked flatly, "Are you waiting for someone?" Ava blinked, slightly confused. "No." "Just me." Jake's eyebrow twitched. "This section is for parties of 2 or more." Ava looked around. There were couples, yes, but also a man eating alone at the bar and an older woman 2 tables away sipping wine. "Also alone. I was seated here by your hostess," Ava said calmly. Jake didn't move. "You'll need to relocate to the bar." Ava stared at him for a moment. Not shocked, just tired. "I'd rather stay here. I was told this table was available." Jake crossed his arms. "I'm sure you were, but we have standards here." The word hung in the air like a slap. Standards, like her presence, was somehow beneath them. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just said 5 words, cold and clean. "Can I speak to management?" Jake rolled his eyes. "He's busy." Then he turned and walked away. Other diners had noticed. One couple exchanged a glance. A man at the corner shook his head slightly, but no one said anything, because that's what people do when they're uncomfortable. They let it pass. Ava sat there for another minute. No one came back. No water. No menu. No service. Just silence. So she stood up, took her purse, and walked out. The hostess looked up, confused. "Miss, was everything okay?" Ava just smiled, tight and thin. Oh, it was enlightening. Then she left. Music fades into a darker tone, subtle strings and low piano. Voiceover whisper. He thought she was nobody, but she just became his biggest mistake. Ava didn't cry in the car. She didn't throw a tantrum or make a scene. That wasn't her style. Instead, she sat behind the wheel, hands still on the steering wheel, staring out the windshield at the glowing lights of Le Vaillant behind her. She smiled to herself, a sharp, small smile. Standards, that word again. She whispered it like a promise. Back at her penthouse apartment, Ava kicked off her heels, walked into her minimalist kitchen, and poured herself a glass of red wine. Not to relax, but to think. She opened her laptop, pulled up the restaurant's website, clicked through the press mentions, checked the parent company. That waiter, Jake, probably didn't know she'd built 2 successful tech platforms. Didn't know. She'd been on the cover of business magazines. Didn't know the name Ava Sinclair was being whispered in investor circles, and he definitely didn't know. She had just bought a 12% stake in the same private equity firm that owned Le Vaillant. It wasn't a direct path, but it was a door. And Ava knew how to open doors, especially the ones people tried to keep closed to women like her. The next morning, she made a few calls, one to her attorney, one to her financial advisor, and one to a quiet little mergers and acquisitions contact named Felix, who owed her a favor. Over the next 2 weeks, Ava worked in silence. She reviewed earnings reports, studied. the franchise structure. And what she found, Le Vaillant wasn't doing well. Revenue was down, staff turnover was high, customer satisfaction ratings had dipped, especially at the flagship location where Jake worked. Opportunity was wide open, and Ava walked through it. She didn't act out of revenge. This wasn't about proving she belonged in that restaurant. It was about proving that the problem wasn't her presence, it was their perception. Felix called her on a Friday afternoon. "They're looking to offload 3 underperforming branches," he said. "One of them's your place." Ava didn't blink. "Make the offer. I want controlling shares in the holding group." There was a pause. All 3 locations? All 3, plus the name. By Monday morning, she had signed the letter of Dent. Jake was still pouring wine that day, still making snide comments to customers who didn't look the part, still thinking he ran the room, while completely unaware that the room was about to belong to someone else. And Ava wasn't planning to walk back in. Not yet. Not until it was official. Not until he was the one asking, "Can I help you, ma'am?" Music rises into a slow, elegant build, like the overture to a quiet war. Voiceover whisper. They gave her a reason. She gave herself a mission. Ava didn't announce anything. She didn't post cryptic quotes online, didn't hint at revenge, didn't brag in group chats. She just worked, and in silence. Things moved. The acquisition closed on a cloudy Thursday morning. The paperwork was signed inside a Manhattan office. Leather chairs, glass walls, and zero noise, except for the scratch of pens across paper. The final signature, Ava Sinclair, CEO. The holding company was now hers, including full operational control of the Le Vaillant restaurant group. Felix slid the folder across the table. "Congratulations. You now own the building they didn't want to serve you in," Ava leaned back. "No. I own the mindset they thought they could keep." That evening, Ava sat by the window of her apartment, watching the city light up. One building in particular stood out. Le Vaillant, the restaurant where she was made to feel small. She could see the glow of the dining room from 10 stories up. And she thought, this isn't about punishment. This is about planting something better. The next morning, she met with her new executive team. Ava didn't waste time. "I want staff reviews from every location. Anonymous, unfiltered. I want numbers, retention, ratings, every complaint filed in the last 24 months. They nodded quickly. "Also," she added, "I want a list of every single person still employed at the flagship." They paused. "All of them?" Ava looked up, especially the ones wearing name tags. Jake's name was on that list. Still, working lunch and dinner shifts, still acting like the gatekeeper of some exclusive club. He had no idea that the guest he once pushed away was now signing his paychecks. A week later, Ava scheduled a surprise inspection at the flagship location. She didn't tell anyone. She just showed up. Sharp black pantsuit, simple heels, minimal jewelry, professional, powerful, understated. She walked through the front doors, the same ones that once made her feel invisible. But now, the room paused. The hostess stood up straighter. The manager blinked twice. And Jake? He was at the back, polishing glasses. He looked up and saw her. At first, there was confusion, then a flash of memory, then disbelief. "No way." He stepped forward. "Ma'am, do you have a reservation?" Ava smiled, just enough to sting. "I own the building. Do I still need one?" Music cuts to a single piano note, sharp and dramatic, like a pin dropping. Voiceover, whisper. She walked back in, but this time the table already belonged to her. Jake stood frozen, the tray in his hands dipped slightly. A glass clinked against a wine bottle, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on Ava. She didn't look away, didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just stood there, calm, composed, completely in control. The restaurant manager, a man named Cole, rushed over, clearly flustered. "Good evening, ma'am. I wasn't expecting." Ava cut him off gently. You're under new ownership. I thought. I'd introduce myself in person. Cole swallowed hard. Ms. Sinclair, yes, of course, please, right this way. As she walked through the dining room, all eyes followed. Some people recognized her. Some just felt the shift in energy. Jake, still in place, whispered under his breath, "This can't be real." Ava sat at the same table where she'd once been humiliated. Only now? It wasn't in the corner. It was centered, with a view of the entire room. Cole handed her a menu. "Would you like the chef's tasting menu tonight?" Ava glanced up. "No." She paused, then added, "I'd like to be served by Jake." Cole blinked. Jake overheard. The room went still. Cole turned, hesitated. "Ma'am, if I may, I want him to serve me," Ava said again, softly, clearly, with zero hesitation. Cole nodded stiffly. "Jake, table 7. Jake approached slowly. His skin was pale now. "Good evening," he muttered, placing a napkin on the table without meeting her eyes. "Welcome back." Ava didn't respond. She simply looked up and said, "You remember what you said to me last time?" Jake stiffened. "No, ma'am," Ava tilted her head. "We have standards here." That was the line, wasn't it? He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean—" "Oh, I'm sure you did." She smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was the kind of smile that says, "You taught me who you were, and I remembered." Jake took her order with a trembling hand. The entire meal, he served her personally, poured her wine, presented each course with stiff formality. He never looked her in the eye, not once. Halfway through dessert, Ava called over Cole again. "Would you gather the staff, please?" Cole blinked. "The entire staff?" "Yes, front and back of house. I have something to say." 10 minutes later, the dining room had shifted. Customers sat whispering, watching. The staff, servers, cooks, hostesses, gathered near the bar. Jake stood off to the side. Ava rose from her seat. She looked at them, one by one, then said, "You work hard, you put in hours most people never see, and sometimes you work under leadership that makes you feel less than." She let the words settle. "That ends today." Music swells slowly. Not loud, but with quiet power. Voiceover whisper. She didn't return for revenge. She came back to raise the standard. Ava stood before the staff, her voice calm, measured. "I'm not here to fire anyone tonight." There was a visible release of breath in the room. Jake looked up for the first time, but Ava continued, "I'm here to raise a mirror." She turned, slightly, her gaze moving across faces. Cooks in aprons, servers in polished shoes, busboys with towels folded neatly over arms. "When I came here weeks ago, I was refused service. Not because I was loud, not because I was rude, but because someone made a decision based on what I looked like." The staff grew still. She let the weight of her words settle, not as accusation, but as truth. "And I could have let that moment define me, but I chose to define the moment instead." She paused, then spoke again, clearer. "As of today, this restaurant, and the entire Le Vaillant brand, belongs to me." Gasps. A few people exchanged stunned looks. One server actually dropped a notepad. A cook near the back whispered, "She bought us?" Another responded, "No, she owns it." Jake looked like he had just been punched in the chest. His eyes locked on Ava. No words, just regret and maybe fear. Ava turned to him directly. "Jake," he stiffened, "I won't ask you to apologize because I'm not interested in your words." She took a slow step forward. "I'm interested in your actions, the ones you've shown before and the ones you'll choose next." She turned back to the group. "Everyone in this room has a choice to make. You can keep working here under new leadership with new standards. Respect will be non-negotiable. Diversity, not just tolerated, but celebrated. Or," she shrugged slightly, "you can walk." There was silence. Then applause, small at first, then growing, not from the customers, but from the staff, from the dishwasher, the line cook, even the young server who had once seen Jake turn people like Ava away. Jake didn't clap. He just stood there, silent, still, until Ava said, "Jake, you're dismissed for the night. We'll speak again." If you return with humility, not a uniform. Jake hesitated, then left. Not in anger, but in shame. Ava sat back down at her table. A new server approached, young, nervous, respectful. "Ms. Sinclair, would you like anything else?" She smiled. "Yes, I'd like to finish my dessert. In peace." Music swells to a soft, satisfying conclusion. Calm, victorious, and full of power. Voiceover whisper. She didn't just claim her seat at the table. She bought the whole room and rewrote the rules. The next morning, Jake didn't show up. No text, no call, no resignation letter. Just silence. Some of the staff said he was embarrassed. Others said he was angry. But Ava, she wasn't thinking about him. She was in the back office, not to micromanage, but to listen. Her first act as owner? Hosting a team meeting. Not for policies, not for rules, but for voices. The staff filed in one by one. They looked unsure, half expecting cameras or consequences. Instead, Ava stood at the front and said, "Tell me what this place has been like. Tell me what needs to change." At first it was quiet. Then it came. No one ever asks what we think. The old manager only cared about profits. We've had regulars treated better just because they look like them. We've lost good people because they didn't fit the vibe. Ava didn't interrupt, didn't judge, she just listened and wrote line by line, voice by voice. By the end of the hour, she had a list, not of complaints but of solutions. Later that afternoon, Ava posted something on the restaurant's official social media page. Just one photo, a long dining table, empty, polished, bathed, warm light, and the caption, "Everyone deserves a seat, especially the ones who were never invited." Ava Sinclair, owner. Within 24 hours, the post had gone viral. Hundreds of thousands of shares. News outlets, podcasts, even national TV. People weren't just talking about a restaurant. They were talking about a shift. Ava declined most interview requests, but when one reporter caught her outside the building, mic in hand, he asked, "Why? Didn't you just report the discrimination and move on?" She looked straight into the camera and said, "Because I'm not here to complain about systems. I'm here to replace them." Then walked away. That evening, the restaurant was full. Reservations doubled. New faces, young, old, diverse, filled every corner of the room, and at the center, Ava not just watching, but belonging. A young girl, no older than 10, walked past her table and stopped. "Are you the lady who owns this place now?" Ava smiled. "Yes, I am." The girl looked amazed. "Can girls like me do that too?" Ava leaned in and said, "Baby, girls like you were born to." Music swells, rich, emotional, warm. Voiceover whisper. She didn't just open the door, she held it open. For everyone else. 2 weeks later, the restaurant was thriving. Social media buzzed. Reviews poured in, glowing. Ava's name became synonymous with class, courage, and quiet power. She didn't just save the brand. She redefined it. That afternoon, while reviewing supplier contracts in her office, Ava's assistant entered, hesitant. "There's someone here to see you. Says he used to work here." Ava looked up from her laptop. "Jake?" The assistant nodded. Ava paused, then said, "Send him in." Jake entered slowly. He wasn't wearing the uniform anymore, just jeans, a wrinkled shirt, and something new on his face. Humility. He stood before her desk, hands in his pockets. No smirk, no swagger, just silence. "Ms. Sinclair," he began. "The came to say I was wrong." Ava didn't speak, she let the moment hang. Jake swallowed. "I treated you like you didn't belong. 'Cause somewhere along the way, I started believing that some people don't, and that's not just ugly, it's dangerous." His voice cracked slightly. "You didn't fire me. You could have. You probably should have. But you didn't. And that's been eating me alive." Ava closed her laptop gently, stood up, walked around the desk until she stood directly in front of him. "Why now?" she asked. Jake looked down. "Because I saw what you built here, and I realized the only thing I ever served was arrogance. He met her eyes again. I came to say I'm sorry, not for a job, not for pity, just because it's time. Ava studied him, not with anger, but with something deeper. Then she asked, "What do you think respect looks like, Jake?" He hesitated. "I think it looks like listening, even when you think you already know the answer." She nodded, then stepped aside and pointed to the front door. "There's a table out there. It's not reserved, it's open. Sit, eat like any other customer." Jake froze. "Really?" Ava smiled, gently but firmly. "That's what equity actually looks like." He nodded, tears forming in the corners of his eyes, and walked out. Slower this time. Softer, smaller, but maybe finally real. That night he dined alone. Quietly, gratefully. A server refilled his water. Another brought him dessert. On the house. And as he ate, Jake looked around the room and saw what Ava had created. A space that welcomed the very people he once thought didn't belong. Music swells into a full jazz trio, rich, honest, redemptive. Voice over whisper. She didn't just demand change. She made room for it, even for those who once shut her out. The restaurant didn't just look different now. It felt different. The air wasn't stiff with quiet judgment. It moved, like a living thing. Laughter at one table, a birthday song at another. And at the center of it all, dignity. Ava sat, near the bar, sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass. She wasn't there to oversee. She was there to observe, because what she'd built wasn't about control. It was about culture. That evening, a small group of college students walked in. All young black women dressed casually, clearly nervous. One of them whispered, "This place is way too fancy for us." A hostess overheard and smiled. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be, right this way." From her seat, Ava heard it. Didn't say anything, didn't need to. But inside, she smiled. Later that night, the chef, a soft-spoken woman named Camilla, brought Ava a new dish, something not on the menu. "It's a fusion plate," Camilla explained. "West African spices with French technique." Ava took one bite, closed her eyes. "This tastes like home. And the future." Camilla beamed. "That's exactly what we're going for." Then came the letter, delivered by hand, unmarked envelope. Simple paper. Ava opened it slowly. It was from the previous owner of Le Vaillant. "I heard what you did. I'm not proud of what we allowed that place to become, but I am proud of what you've turned it into. If you ever decide to franchise, I'd be honored to invest in you." She folded the note, didn't respond. Because sometimes, success is the only reply you need. The following weekend, Ava hosted the first open table event, a monthly tradition where meals were donated, and local families from underserved communities were invited to dine. Free of charge, chefs volunteered, staff showed up early, customers donated anonymously to support it, because the mission wasn't just to flip a business, and it was to flip the model. That night, a single mother with 2 young kids hugged Ava tightly. "I've never sat in a place like this," she said, eyes welling up. "Not without feeling like I had to earn it." Ava touched her shoulder. "You don't have to earn basic human decency. You just deserve it." Music builds, a hopeful jazz-soul hybrid, grounded and warm. Voice over whisper. They built it to keep people out. She rebuilt it to bring everyone in. It had been 3 months. 3 months since Ava walked back through those doors. 3 months since everything changed. The restaurant was no longer just a business. It was a movement. Every week brought new faces, not just to dine, but to learn. Students from local high schools came for mentorship dinners. Young chefs trained under a staff that looked like them. And servers were hired not based on how they spoke, but how they listened. The walls now featured artwork from local black artists. Each painting told a story of joy, of struggle, of pride. And in the back hallway, framed under soft light, hung a photo of Ava at her desk, captioned, "Built with grace, owned with power." One evening, a food critic known for being brutally honest arrived unannounced. She had heard the Rumors read the headlines but believed little. She ordered quietly, observed everything from the way the staff moved to the way guests were greeted equally, regardless of the clothes they wore. At the end of her meal, she asked to meet the owner. Ava came to the table. Calm, warm, curious. The critic looked up. I've been reviewing restaurants for 22 years. Only a few ever made me feel like I was eating history. Ava smiled softly. This place serves food, but the real meal is respect. The critic paused, then stood, and hugged her. No notebook, no interview. Just human to human. The next day, her review hit the front page of the city's most prestigious food magazine. More than a restaurant, it's a restoration of dignity. Reservations sold out for the month. But Ava stayed the same, still showed up early, still greeted staff by name, still made time to sit with young girls who reminded her of herself. That evening, a new hostess came running back to the office. There's a woman here asking for you, she said breathlessly. Says she doesn't want a table. She just wants to thank you. Ava walked out front. An older black woman stood near the door, elegant, graceful, proud. I walked by this place for 10 years, the woman said. Never felt welcome. But tonight I saw a little girl holding her grandmother's hand, walking in like she belonged. And I knew something had changed. Ava nodded. It did. They stood in silence for a beat. Then the woman added, You didn't just buy the building. You bought back a piece of our worth. Music rises, gentle gospel-inspired chords over jazz piano. Voice over whisper. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's served quietly, at a table with no reservations. It was nearly closing time. The lights had dimmed, dishes were done, chairs stacked. Ava stood alone in the center of the restaurant. She wasn't checking the books. She wasn't correcting staff. She was just breathing it in. The silence, the space, the transformation. She ran her fingers along the edge of a table. The table, the one she had been told she didn't fit. Now it belonged to everyone, especially to those who were once told, not you. The general manager walked by. "And everything good, boss?" Ava smiled, more than good, then paused. It feels finished. But it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A week later, the restaurant hosted its first legacy dinner. No press, no influencers, just 30 young black girls from local schools, all invited to dine, dream, and speak with women who looked like them, who had made it, doctors, writers, entrepreneurs, and Ava in the middle but never above. Each girl was given a handwritten card. You don't have to ask for a seat. You can build the whole table. Ava Sinclair. At the end of the night, Ava stood quietly by the door. A small girl with big eyes walked up and asked, "Will I be like you one day?" Ava knelt down. "No, sweetheart, you'll be better." That image, Ava, the little girl, and the open door behind them, would later become a painting, donated to a cultural center, framed in City Hall, shared online across the world. The caption below, "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears heels and serves dessert with grace." Music swells one final time, rich, soulful, victorious. Voiceover whisper, closing line. She came in for dinner and left with destiny. Because when you're told you don't belong, you don't have to knock louder. You build your own door, fade out.